On the night of April 28, 1958, a one-time civilian interpreter for the United States Army during the Korean War by the name of In Ho-oh stepped outside of the apartment complex that he shared with his uncle towards a mailbox across the street in order to mail a letter to his parents in South Korea. The 26-year-old graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania was studying political science after having graduated in 1957 at the Eastern Baptist College with a degree in philosophy. His family were devout Christians, and after having escaped the communist takeover of North Korea, had decided that he wanted to become a South Korean statesman when he finished his studies as a foreign exchange student at the University of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, that same night, a few blocks away, about 11 teenage boys, including 15-year-old Douglas MacArthur Clark, 17-year-old Robert Williams, and another teen, Alfonso Borum, had been ejected from a local rock and roll dance party. Conflicting reports state that they either did not have enough to pay the 65 cents entry fee or that they were ejected due to the dress code. In any case, these teens were angry, and they had also been drinking. They were ready to pounce on whoever was in their way to take money for the dance party that they felt should not have denied them. Unfortunately, the 26-year-old graduate exchange student from South Korea, the young man who came from a family with strong Christian beliefs, happened to be in the way. According to an eyewitness account by 18-year-old Edward McLeod, printed in the October 1, 1958 issue of the Philadelphia Inquirer, he witnessed the boys gathering near the spot where In Ho-oh would later be attacked, drinking and working themselves up. When they saw Oh at the mailbox, they attacked. He was able to break free and run, but Alfonso Borum ran Oh down, striking him in the head with a bottle. When Oh fell, Borum kicked the University of Pennsylvania student repeatedly, the others with him following suit, kicking Oh until he was unconscious. Borum then rolled his victim over, finding an empty wallet. The boys then ran. Oh died as a result of the beating, and the public put pressure on Philadelphia's mayor, Richardson Dilworth, who, overcome with both grief and shame, wept at the funeral of In Ho-oh. The South Korean ambassador, Dr. Yu Chan-yang, publicly expressed his shock and disappointment at the murder of one of his country's nationals in a city that, by his account, was one of the outstanding cultural cities in the United States. The ceasefire to the Korean War was just 5 years before, with South Korea being an important ally with the United States during the Cold War. Thus, the local Philadelphia gang-related murder was gaining unwanted international attention on the world stage and a source of anti-American propaganda by America's Cold War opponents. Fingers were being pointed, and blame for the murder was shared all around. Charges were brought before the Philadelphia City Council Committee that the police department had been short by 165 officers of the quota provided by council appropriations, the shortage of officers allegedly being a major factor in why youth crime was on the rise in Philadelphia. In response, Philadelphia's police commissioner Thomas Gibbons, described as the Incorruptible for his fight against the mafia, initiated a citywide roundup, mass arrests of repeat offenders, with a reported number of 2,000 arrests. This following the apprehending of the 11 accused of In Ho-oh's murder. Public outrage at the murder was so intense that the defense requested a change of venue, citing inflammatory public opinion in the Philadelphia press. However, the defiant behavior of the accused, combined with the national outrage covered in the press, made such a change seem useless. The defendant's case was not helped when one of the boys, a 16-year-old who had originally agreed to become a material witness in exchange for a lighter sentence by the name of Harry McLeod, briefly escaped after being placed in the same room with hardened, older, adult criminals. With them, McLeod had broken out of the holding cell, but was later picked up along with the other escapees. Judge Louis E. Leventhal had decided that whether the case would be tried in Philadelphia or elsewhere, the impartiality or bias of any jury during the summer of 1958 would be the same, as the case had received national coverage. The trial would be held in Philadelphia. It was the reaching out by O's own family, both in the U.S. and in South Korea, that offered either a glimmer of hope or misplaced idealism, depending on one's point of view. Citing their own Christian beliefs, as well as what they had read about in their country's newspapers in regards to racial segregation in the U.S., the O family petitioned the Philadelphia court and the American ambassador to South Korea that mercy be shown to the boys arrested, with funds gathered by the O family be placed in a trust to be used for the, quote, religious, educational, vocational, and social guidance of the boys when they are released. Their calls for mercy and forgiveness had the unintended effect of exacerbating heated debates over coddling of street gangs, an issue which had been debated just the year before, when the murder of handicapped 15-year-old Michael Farmer, committed by the Egyptian Kings and Dragons street gangs over in New York, sparked national notoriety and outrage. Tragically, these debates over the supposed coddling of troubled young people accused of committing violent crimes would continue that year, as within the span of a few months and even a few days, other and most frighteningly unrelated incidents of violent youth crime would coincidentally follow after the murder of In Ho Oh. The following month, miles away over in New York at Jefferson Park, an eerily similar incident occurred, this one committed by members of the East Harlem Red Wings street gang upon 24-year-old Cuban immigrant Julio Ramos, who was sitting at a park bench with his girlfriend. Apparently, the gang mistook the young adult Ramos for being a Puerto Rican teenager when they beat him to death in front of his horrified girlfriend, in a manner not unlike what had happened to In Ho Oh near the University of Pennsylvania. Before that, and coincidentally happening on the very same night as the murder of In Ho Oh, a 20-year-old leader of the Egyptian Crown's street gang, Ramon Serra, gunned down 16-year-old gang rival Michael Ramos at a Bronx candy store after this Ramos had given Serra a dirty look. Ironically, it was Serra's own 14-year-old girlfriend, Alice Beiron, who aided police in the capture of the young gangster, who himself was just barely out of his teens. 3 days after the simultaneous and unrelated murders of In Ho Oh and Michael Ramos, over at Massapequa High School in Long Island, 15-year-old Bruce Zator ambushed fellow 15-year-old Timothy Wall in the boys' bathroom with his own shotgun, killing Wall instantly. Apparently, Zator was the victim of bullying and had decided that the best way to deal with the problem was to shoot his tormentor. 2 months later, that same year of 1958, San Francisco Bay Area drugstore owner Kenneth Outland was pulled out of his car by a teenage gang who he had refused to sell liquor to. Unlike O, or Julio Ramos for that matter, Outland was lucky. He didn't die from the beating that he received at the hands of this apparently BART street gang, BARTs being the San Francisco 50s-era gang subculture noted for their wearing of club jackets and Ben Davis trousers, though the 42-year-old Outland suffered permanent, lasting brain damage from the beating. All of these incidents, including the beating death of In Ho Oh, were overshadowed that year by the murder spree committed by teenage serial killer Charles Starkweather, in tow with his 14-year-old girlfriend Carol Ann Fugit, up north in Lincoln, Nebraska. Starkweather's murderous rampage sparked such a panic in both Nebraska and Montana that the National Guard was actually called in to hunt down the teenage killer. To this day, There is debate as to whether or not the 14-year-old Fugate was actually a willing accomplice or an unwilling kidnapping victim herself, though there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever as to Starkweather's guilt concerning the 11 innocent victims who died at the end of his shotgun barrel. Within this context, perhaps the reaction by the Philadelphia authorities to the O family's well-intentioned letter of mercy, an epistle born out of their own heartbreak over the loss of their loved one, as well as their Christian beliefs, was, somewhat at least, understandable. Philadelphia Municipal Court Judge Keller Gilbert angrily berated the pleading for the poor misguided defendants, as well as the implied vilifying of judges who were acting in the public safety when sentencing gang members who were found guilty of having committed violent crimes. The O family's idealism, or dedication to their beliefs, in the face of the loss of a beloved family member, would have to take a back seat to the public and official outrage over growing inner-city youth crime. The teens convicted of O's murder ranged in ages from 15 to 19. Out of all of them, however, it was 19-year-old Alfonso Borum who undoubtedly received the harshest sentence. Going by the eyewitness testimony of one of the participants, Edward McLeod, perhaps understandably so. Borum, known as Flip Borum in his neighborhood, had a long police record that included burglary and assault. As previously mentioned, he was the one who beat O with a bottle, leading the stomping attack on the floored graduate student. Borum sat and listened coolly with no signs of emotion as the jury delivered its verdict of guilty. While Borum's mother Ruth wept, Judge Joseph Sloan handed down his sentence. It would be the death penalty for 19-year-old Alfonso Flip Borum. As for the fate of the younger friends who had participated in the beating, 17-year-old Franklin Marshall would serve 10 to 20, while 16-year-old Leonard Johnson would be handed a life sentence. 16-year-olds Douglas MacArthur Clark and the recaptured escapee Harry McLeod, 17-year-olds James Wright, Robert Williams, Percy Johnson, and Lonnie Collins, as well as 18-year-olds Harold Johnson and the previously mentioned Edward McLeod, who had turned state's witness against his friends, would receive long prison terms. The attention on Philadelphia's teenage street gangs in the wake of the In-Ho-Oh murder at the University of Pennsylvania, literally a 15-minute walk away from WFIL, was potentially bad for business for Dick Clark and his carefully crafted teenage fans of rock and roll as good teenagers image that he was trying to sell. But like all good businessmen, he simply pushed through. He even suggested stories in the various popular teenage magazines of how his clean-cut and family-oriented teen idols had resisted the temptations of street gang life in order to espouse wholesome, family-friendly, all-American values. By 1959, with the harder-edged and rebellious rock and roll singers out of the picture and Alan Freed's career in ruins, Dick Clark's American Bandstand, with its brand of wholesome, clean-cut, lip-syncing pop teen idols making the cute, well-dressed, and well-behaved teen dancers swoon and sway daily on national TV, now ruled the lucrative youth market.